Hey everybody, welcome back to Fab Fertile TV. Today we're digging into a stool test, and we're talking about the GI map stool test. This is a stool test that we run with all of our one-to-one couples coaching clients, and we're going to talk today about why looking at a stool test is important for your fertility and your hormones, because really most conventional doctors would look at a stool test completely, maybe not at all, or maybe as the last thing. So Brandy, yeah, why is looking at a stool test important?
Well, I mean, I'm sure, and maybe people haven't heard this, but it's kind of something that you hear a lot in functional medicine, but the gut is the second brain. The gut is the center of your immune system. That's where everything related to any symptoms that you're having, it all starts in the gut. That's a very common saying that you hear. It all starts in the gut. And so if your gut is unhealthy, you've got a leaky gut, you've got an imbalance of good gut bacteria, or you have some pathogens that you're not aware of that are there, so bacterial infection, a fungal infection, a parasite infection, then it's going to impair your body's ability to actually use, digest, and absorb all of those amazing organic non-GMO foods that you're eating. And so we always run a stool test because the health of the gut is so vitally important for everybody, not just people dealing with infertility, but every single person. Gut health is extremely important.
Absolutely. And this is something for me where I did the food sensitivity testing, took out all the, took for me, it was gluten, dairy, and corn, and then made these lifestyle changes. And not until years later, when I thought I was like, I had it all going on, I thought I was feeling a lot better. Then all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, my health just wasn't as optimized as it was before. And then I had to dig deeper, and that's when I did a stool test. And for me, I found, and it was like shocking because I'm like, what are you freaking telling me? I'm like, I am like super healthy. I've like made all these changes. And then I found out I had H. pylori, I had streptococcus, and then I also had an overgrowth of yeast in my stool. So it was kind of shocking. I gotta say, I was a little bit angry that I didn't find this out till later, because I never even thought to even look at a stool test. So maybe if you can talk a little bit about H. pylori and some of those ones that I just mentioned, because we see a lot of this. Like when we do with our couples, we haven't had a stool test that comes back saying, "Whoo, everything's great." There's usually something going on in the stool, and a lot of times we will find H. pylori. So maybe start with that one first.
Yeah, for sure. So I see hundreds and hundreds of stool tests, and I have never seen one come back with nothing on it.
Mhm.
So a lot of people have this idea that in order to get a parasite or some severe bacterial infection, you need to go to a third world country or you need to travel overseas. And that's not the case. You can easily get those living in the US, living in Canada, North America. And so we have these infections a lot of times not knowing that they're there, and they can lie dormant in your gut for years and you have no idea that they're there, wreaking havoc, causing these symptoms that people seem to think are normal. But that's like the symptoms, and then eventually it triggers worse symptoms, and then it triggers autoimmunity, or then it triggers infertility or diabetes or all of these different major illnesses that we have today. And so you were talking about H. pylori. I had H. pylori as well. And there's actually a pretty good percentage of the population that has H. pylori overgrowth. So the bacteria itself, we all have it in our gut, but when it begins to overgrow, that's when it's a problem. And H. pylori is very easily transmitted. So it's one of those ones that's really difficult because if one person has it, then you have to check the entire family. It can be passed via saliva. So, I mean, you could get a stool test, you could do the protocol, but if you don't check your husband, or your kids, or your dog, or your cat, then it could just be rotating in that house all the time, and you're just going to keep reinfecting yourself. And so this is one that we actually see come up quite a bit. And like you, Sarah, I had H. pylori. Before I kind of had more training on it, I went to the doctor. I did the pharmaceuticals. So basically, it's a week of antibiotics and acid reducers. And it worked, but the problem with that is whenever you go to the doctor for H. pylori, they're not going to check it one unless you come to them complaining of symptoms of an ulcer, because they just think, well, if you have H. pylori, that means you have an ulcer, and if you're not complaining of gut pain, then it's not there. And that's totally not true. I mean, many people that we see that we find H. pylori, they don't have gut symptoms.
That was me. I literally had, because you think of H. pylori, it's like acid reflux and those sort of things and stomach acid issues. And I had none of that. I had no symptoms. I just was not able to completely feel, I was fatigued and, you know, not feeling my best self.
Yeah, and some of the most common things you see, a lot of people don't have those gut symptoms, or they don't have GERD or acid reflux. They're the ones who are going to the doctor and they're coming back with low iron, low B12. They're just not absorbing minerals for whatever reason, because what happens is H. pylori lowers your stomach acid. That's where it thrives. So it lowers the stomach acid so it can thrive. And then you're not able to digest your food. So you're not getting nutrients. You're getting tired. You're getting depleted. You're getting iron deficient, anemic. And then the other thing that happens, the reason why some people will get acid reflux is, contrary to what people believe, acid reflux, people think it's too much acid in your stomach. But what happens most of the time is that you need a good amount of acid in your stomach to signal the valve on the top of your gut to close when you eat food. And so if there's not enough acid in your stomach to signal that valve, it becomes weak and flappy and it opens. And so then things start splashing up, and it's not because you have too much acid, it's because there's not enough. And so that's another thing that we see a lot of people coming to us who do have GERD. They're on proton pump inhibitors, but we're looking at their blood work. It looks like they're deficient in minerals. And we do a gut test and we find H. pylori, or we find some other things going on. And we're like, well, no, actually, it's you didn't have enough stomach acid, and we need to support your digestion. We need to get the bacteria back in balance, and we need to get rid of either some parasite that we found, or a fungal overgrowth, or a bacterial overgrowth.
Yeah, and a lot of times people will come to us, especially with the unexplained infertility. We've had people with unexplained infertility having multiple parasites. So to me, that's not really unexplained. And it's the sort of conventional medicine won't even look at the stool test. So especially if you have unexplained infertility, looking at a stool test is like stop number one. So what kind of parasites can we like, we see a whole bunch of them. What's sort of some of the ones you wanted to share?
Some of the most common ones we will see is Blastocystis hominis, Giardia, Cryptosporidium, Indolamax nana. Those are some of the most common parasites, and people are coming back with them even though they haven't traveled anywhere out of the country. And one thing I kind of want to bring up, because we get this question a lot, is, well, my doctor did my stool test and they didn't find anything. And it's two different things. So I did the same thing. I had a stool test with my doctor, and then a week later I did a functional test. The stool test with my doctor, nothing came up, zero. When I did the functional stool test, we found H. pylori and Klebsiella, which is a bacterial infection that's pretty bad and it's hard to get rid of. And so when you're doing a stool collection at your doctor, you're collecting stool one time. And you're not always, whenever you're having a bowel movement, you're not always shedding the bacteria or the parasite every single time you have a bowel movement. So that one time when you collect your stool, if you didn't shed it, it's going to come back and nothing's there, but you actually do have it. Now, the other thing is that usually when a doctor is doing a stool test, they're using what's called microscopy. So they're taking the stool, and then by the human eye, they're putting it under a microscope and looking to see if they're finding any of these. And if they don't, then it's going to come back clean, whereas the test that we use looks for the DNA in the stool, and we can catch that with just one stool sample.
Yeah, and we will take a different approach as far as healing this, because we say for H. pylori, if you go to your conventional doctor, you're going to be, recommended this is a Prev pack or this antibiotic regimen. And same for if there's a parasite, you may be recommended an antiparasitic or an antibiotic to get rid of or eradicate the parasite. Whereas we're going to recommend a more low and slow approach with supplements. Can you talk about kind of the difference between that?
Yes, we take an herbal approach. More and more, they're finding that a lot of these pathogens are becoming resistant to the antibiotics or the antiparasitics. And so when you go to your doctor, you'll usually get it for a course of 7 to 14 days. And then usually they won't retest. and they don't really ever talk to you about re-inoculating your gut with good gut bacteria and doing gut healing. And so that's kind of that missing piece. You could go ahead and take the antibiotic and it'll get rid of it, but you didn't fix the problem and that why it was caused in the first place.
Mhm.
So we look at it as we use herbs, which tend to work better because they're not resistant to those herbs. We do it over a longer period of time, so over the life cycle, a life cycle or 2 life cycles of the pathogen that we find, while we add in probiotics to rebuild the gut at the same time. And we're doing supplements and herbs and other things to help rebuild the gut wall so that once we've gotten rid of everything, your gut is healthy and it's in a place where now you can feel confident that you're not just going to get reinfected again because you didn't take care of re-inoculating your gut and rebuilding the gut lining.
Yeah, using that probiotic therapy is crucial because if you're going the antibiotic or antiparasitic route, it's like a bomb that's gone off in your body, and it's gotten rid of all the good bacteria, and the bad bacteria. So it's being able to recognize that's going to happen. You got to do a lot of healing on the other end. Whereas this is it's not the bomb; it's still healing your gut, but it's using probiotics and things over like a longer period of time.
Yeah, it's not wiping out everything. Some people will find commonly they'll take antibiotics and then they start struggling with yeast infections. And it's because those antibiotics have wiped out everything, including the good gut bacteria that we need to keep our guts healthy, to keep any yeast in check. We all have yeast in our gut, but those good bacteria keep them in check. They don't allow them to overgrow. And so when you wipe out everything and you don't re-inoculate and repopulate your gut with the good guys, you start having a lot of problems. And so that's why we always take the approach of, if you're going to do the herbs and the antiparasitics, then you need to take probiotics, and we need to do gut healing with herbs like aloe and slippery elm and all of those really good herbs that help to rebuild the gut lining.
Yeah, and a lot of people think that they have Candida. So there's a lot of anti-Candida diet or Candida diets and different protocols. And this is something that I struggle with for a while as well. And I still have propensity for yeast overgrowth. But for us now, it's actually looking at yeast overgrowth is the last thing, because it's opportunistic. So share with everybody about why we look at attacking yeast last.
Yeah, so like you said, it's an opportunistic pathogen. So what it means is that when the environment is there for it to overgrow, it will take advantage of that and it will overgrow. So you'll start seeing overgrowth of Candida, like the example I just said of having antibiotics for 2 weeks and there's no good gut bugs left to keep them under control. They see that and they say, oh, there's nobody there to fight me. I'm going to take advantage of this and I'm going to set up house and I'm going to start to overgrow and start wreaking havoc. And so a lot of these anti-Candida protocols, they're great. They do work. What they're recommending is what you should be doing for Candida, but it's not addressing the root cause of why it happened in the first place. And so if you have pathogens in your gut or you have an imbalance of good gut bacteria, you could do this protocol, but it's not going to fix the problem. So it's kind of a whole system approach, and that's why we always address Candida last. We want to make sure that we clean up the environment so that when we do get rid of the Candida, there isn't an environment there for them to set up shop again once we've gone through a 30 or 60-day protocol.
Yeah, we also recommend a food sensitivity test as well, and we talked about that in our last episode. But really, the best one to see if there's a gluten issue actually is by doing the stool test. So it's the anti-gliadin. Can you talk about that as to why a stool test would flag a issue with gluten?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good version. There is no like perfect gluten test, but there is a marker on the GI map that we use that looks at anti-gliadin, and it's looking at whether or not the immune system in your gut is making antibodies to gluten. So sometimes we don't catch it on a food sensitivity test because it only checks for 1 or 2 of the gluten proteins. There's actually 64 gluten proteins, and so if it's only checking for 2 and you're not making antibodies to those 2, it'll come back and say, oh no, you don't have a gluten problem, when in fact you do. It's just they didn't catch the one part that you are sensitive to. And so the stool is pretty sensitive because it's not looking at the 64, but it's still looking to see, are you making antibodies in the gut towards gluten? And so it's multiple ways for us to see if gluten is an issue for you. We very commonly see a lot of people coming up sensitive to it, or people who say, I'm completely gluten free, and we run the stool test and that number is really high, and we find out they're being cross-contaminated, their spouse is using the same utensils. Some people who are super sensitive, their spouse may be out eating at a restaurant and then they come home and they give them a kiss and there's a little gluten on their lips and they're not aware of it, and that is a cross-reactant. So it's we see this so often. I'm eating super clean, I'm eating a gluten-free diet, but yet those numbers come back really high, and we dig deeper and we're like, well, you're being exposed here.
Yeah, so we talk about that in the autoimmune protocol with cross reactors. That's episode number 29 on the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast. So you can dig into that. But common cross reactors are oats, chocolate, instant coffee, even avocados.
Yeah, some of the gluten-free grains can be cross-reactors,
Yeah,
eggs, soy, all those sorts of things, which unfortunately, milk, dairy is a huge one,
yeah, casein.
which unfortunately for some people, it means that they have to take that out of their diet for a period of time. But generally with cross-reactors, it's not forever. It's just enough for you to allow that immune system to calm down, to stop reacting to those foods and creating antibodies. And most of the time, if you do the gut work, you get rid of the pathogens, you do some healing, you can start reintroducing some of those cross reactors. But it's really important to understand that if you've got a lot going on in your gut, it will take some work and some sacrifice of removing some foods for a short period of time, but it's not forever.
Yeah, again, if your body is under attack, if it's fighting a parasite, a bacterial infection, H. pylori, fungal overgrowth, it wants to survive. It doesn't want to procreate. So that's why this is extremely important. So these tests, the GI map we ship this test worldwide, and basically it comes to your door. We drop ship it, and then it's a simple collection and then sent back to the labs, and then we can give you the feedback for the results. So if you're wanting to know more about the stool test, you can book a free Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery call, and we will share a little more about that. And also, this stool test is also included in our couples coaching program. So if you wanted to learn more about that program as well, just book yourself a free call and we can chat. Until next time.